Hello, welcome back. I'm joined on set once again by our business editor, William Edwards. Hello again, Will.
Hi, Lou.
Now, let's start on the latest on the Eurozone crisis, this unending flow of stories involving the Eurozone crisis, and the spotlight's on Spain and dishing out more money to Bankia.
Yeah, quite a bit of news coming out of Spain this morning. Last night it was announced that Bankia, the ailing lender, will get around 4.5 billion euros from the Spanish state. Now, this is following its announcement on Friday that it lost a similar amount for the first half of 2012. But this is just a bridging loan is the idea, because of course the Eurozone partners of Spain have announced 100 billion euros will be going to Spanish banks, but that won't come into effect until around November at the latest. So until then, they're going to need this money. But the Spanish government itself is very much still under pressure. Now, in July, a record amount of money was taken out of Spanish accounts and taken to other countries by investors. And just this morning, there's been announced a rise in unemployment to 4.63 million people now out of work. That's well over 25% unemployment rate there. So quite incredible. Very difficult times for Spain.
Certainly, those are some eye-watering figures, Will. And of course, Madrid is also under pressure from local governments, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. On Monday, Andalusia was the latest region to ask for some cash. They need around €1 billion to tide them over, they say, from the central government. And of course, this follows on from Catalonia asking for €5 billion to keep them going. A central fund has been set up, but again, this is just being put into effect, but just adding to the pressure on the central government in Madrid.
Now, talking more widely about the EU, that's also coming under the spotlight from Moody's credit rating agency.
Yeah, well, hearing all this news, it's perhaps no surprise, is it? And with the Eurozone crisis rumbling on, the agency has said that the EU itself, the European Union, is under a negative outlook for its AAA rating. You can see there the countries that still hold a AAA rating from Moody's, the UK, Netherlands, Germany and France. They, though, are all on negative outlook themselves. So you can see why the EU itself has now been added to that list. Now, of course, German Chancellor Angela Merkel is the woman at the centre of the Eurozone crisis, according to many, and she was telling the German electorate yesterday what she thinks about her Eurozone partners and what they have to do.
We have to say, you must make changes. We know from Germany that that's the only way things get better. It is not enough to continue like this. But I also say that it's such a difficult phase. These countries deserve our solidarity, that we want them to overcome these difficulties, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, next, here in France, Peugeot's Aulnay-sous-Bois factory is ramping up again after the holidays, but the plant faces closure, and with more poor sales figures from the company just announced, there are concerns over the future of Peugeot Citroën.
After summer closures at factories across France, most Peugeot staff returned to work last week. In many places, the atmosphere is tense as workers brace for thousands of job cuts.
I'm feeling pretty nervous. And the morale's not great either, because I know it's going to be very difficult. There'll be a lot of pressure, and it'll be difficult.
Workers' unions have promised a tough fight in the months to come as they seek to put the brakes on the 8,000 redundancies announced by Peugeot's management. Meanwhile, the car maker's struggling to steer the debt-ridden business back onto the right track. In August, sales of new PSA Peugeot Citroën vehicles fell by more than 10%. The manufacturer's stock price has tumbled by around 2/3 in the space of a year, meaning Peugeot could be dumped out of France's leading CAC 40 share index. The firm's still awaiting the conclusions of a government report expected in September, as ministers seek to establish the true financial state of the company.
So, Will, how are the markets looking today?
Well, things are just opening up here in Europe. We've heard a bit of bad news coming along, but things are still relatively stable, just dipping into the red at open of play here in Europe in London and Frankfurt, just above the parapet in Paris. Of course, those hopes later in the week for some sort of stimulus from the European central banks keeping things buoyed up. In Asia, though, quite a different story. Those figures, maybe a sort of hangover from the figures coming out on Monday and at the weekend from China, slowing a real slowdown in the Chinese economy, really kicking in there and taking the attention of the markets.
Now, Will, we just looked at cars with the Peugeot Citroën story. Now let's look at planes. And there's details of today's Lufthansa cabin crew strike. They've just been announced, Will.
Yeah, that is now underway, in fact, in some German airports. We're talking about Berlin, Tegel, Frankfurt and Munich. Now, of course, there was a strike on Friday by Lufthansa cabin crews. That was just in Frankfurt. So this one is expected to cause considerable disruption, being at 3 airports now rather than 1. Lufthansa, of course, Europe's largest airline as well by passenger numbers. So this really could have quite a few knock-on effects. Of course, it is over pay and conditions, with the cabin crew wanting a 5% rise for more work, whereas Lufthansa is saying that 3.5% more is their best offer.
OK, Will. Well, next with the Democratic Convention getting underway this Tuesday in the United States, the economy remains at top of the agenda for many voters. One of the worst legacies of the financial crisis has been towns across the US, going bankrupt. Well, Vallejo was one of the largest cities to have gone under. We take a look now at how it's dealt with the challenge.
Vallejo, California. 4 years ago, this town near San Francisco made headlines when it became the largest city in the US to declare bankruptcy. The town was overspending its budget by 20% when the housing market collapsed and took the economy with it. Public services were some of the first and worst hit.
We went from a total of 120 firefighters down to about 60 firefighters. So we had a 50% reduction total in staffing. And we also reduced our fire engines from 8 engines down to 4 engines.
City officials say by filing for bankruptcy, Vallejo was spared the worst of the crisis and could weather the storm better.
The protection of bankruptcy allowed us to do things that we would not have been able to do before. So pay less salaries, reduce our bond payments. So we had to make some really drastic changes. And we could have only done that through bankruptcy.
But there were consequences. Large cuts in the police force, coupled with many empty houses due to foreclosures, have led to a 10% rise in thefts and burglaries.
There was the word out that you could come to Vallejo and you could steal cars, you could get, you could deal drugs, and nobody was going to stop you.
Vallejo officially came out of bankruptcy in November last year, but with countless businesses still shut down and unemployment at more than 12%, it's in not much better shape. The small California town reflects one of the biggest challenges for the Obama administration, convincing the nation that the economy has come a long way towards recovery in the past 4 years.
Now, Will, we've obviously had the Olympics in London. The Paralympics are still ongoing. Many business people there thought that it would mean a big boost in profits. Did they see that?
Certainly in the retail sector, it looks like that's not been the case. We've just had figures out for the UK for August. For retail figures, you can see they're down by 0.4%, quite disappointing there. And in fact, London, where the Olympics was hosted, that is particularly badly hit, apparently. Because, of course, before the Olympics were held, many Londoners were worried that the town was going to be absolutely overrun by tourists and supporters. Exactly. But many people just got out of town, got out the way, decided to work from home, that sort of thing. And actually, retailers, particularly in London, really saw a bit of a shortfall there over the summer period. Maybe they'll get an uplift from tourism, though, and help to pay that €11 billion Olympics bill that UK taxpayers have invested in the event. At least it was a good party, eh?
Well, at least GB came third, ahead of France.
Ahead of France.
Well, that's where we leave this edition. Do stay tuned, though. Stuart Norville coming back in just a couple of minutes.